The thing about relationships is that they're absolutely ubiquitous, endemic, permeating. They are the primary feature of reality.
It's the relationship between things that actually forms the fundamental, is more important necessarily than the specific things themselves.
If we don't take care of our rivers, they won't take care of us.
So it's not a question of semantics, it's a question of reality and whether you're working with reality or not.
What is it that the universe, in its current stage of evolution, needs that I alone can contribute?
It all could have been different if you just asked a lady to dance first.
Relational accountability would come into your kitchen and tell you that that plastic carton of milk that you use to add a certain taste to your coffee has a history. It has a story, and that story includes a local shop and all that means. And it includes a supplier and all that means. And it includes a source origin, a farm of some kind, probably a factory farm of some kind. And then there'll be, prior to that, an animal with their own kind of story, probably a cow. And there'll be some kind of machinery, probably, milking it in perpetuity. Now, I think what relational accountability does is it says, all of those things you're accountable for all those things, not just whether or not you recycle your plastic bottle, which is how we tend to think about it, right? We're trying to expand the horizons of our thinking and feeling, deepen and broaden our sense of who we are and what we can do. So it's all of that.
It's a self-organizing system of checks and balances that happen when within networks of different sovereignties, of people who have proper relation together, proper diplomacy. That's not just based on paper law, treaty, these things that are mutable, changeable, breakable, but are based on like genuine relationships, to the point that it's very difficult for people to ignore their accountability within these networks of interdependent relations, because that only results in isolation.
Relational accountability. That's one of those things. It's something that generally it's something that you just live. So it's kind of hard to explain it without actually living it. I think probably it helps. And again, this is one of those things that's really hard to explain cross-culturally because it's hard to have the right language for it. I kind of break it down. Everyone kind of knows what accountability means. So it's like you are accountable for things. If I say relational accountability, it's kind of like recognition that the entire universe or the whole cosmos is made up of relationships. So we aren't just in relationships as people, but it is the relationships that form the basis of reality.
So it's saying we need to join things up. We need to look at whole landscapes. So we need to look at whole rivers. We need to look at our food system as a whole system, et cetera, and thinking about food security. So thinking bi-regionally gives you the capacity to do that. It also introduces this idea of, or reintroduces it, of what it means to be a citizen of place. So we talk a lot about the role of the citizen and how the citizen, in a sense, the political role of the citizen has been diminished to the point at which it's in the box, literally in the ballot box. So a lot of the time we think our role of a citizen is to go and vote in our local elections and to choose the people we want to govern us. We're saying we need to return to an idea of citizenship which is about taking responsibility, becoming more accountable, but also gaining some agency.
It's like a diffuse reciprocity. It's not a one-on-one transaction. Great, you have something I need, I have something you need. We'll exchange, and we both are healthier and we're better able to be able to conduct whatever life and business we're working on. This is more that as a collective, we exchange and bring to the whole what we each of us uniquely can contribute. And out of that, the whole is stronger and more able to not just survive, but thrive in a way that it feeds the landscape. What makes that possible goes back to how the planet has designed the conditions for life. And I think for me, relational accountability, the accountability piece gets kind of weird sometimes the way it's used. It's like I owe you something. But relational accountability is that I am accountable to bring what I uniquely can bring to this whole so that as a whole we can thrive.
Almost everything I do is about relational accountability in one way or another. So I'll just start by saying I would say it's pervasive across. I would say it's pervasive across anything that's going to work or be effective that involves any attempt at a systemic intervention. So if you're trying to create a systemic intervention and you don't have a capacity to hold, sense make, digest, respond, tend to a diverse set of relationships, then how could you possibly have a systemic intervention that works? It is sort of like removing the core logic from the very idea. So I would say for me, relational accountability is not a phrase I've used before. It's something I'm hearing the words from you, but but what the words evoke for me is a conceptual understanding that's in my daily life.
All the Indigenous people that I've talked to in different countries around the world, different places, kind of all this concept resonates with them, because that's how a lot of Indigenous cultures are based upon this concept of relationality and understanding that's the core principle of how things work. So when you understand that, then it kind of leads to sort of things like how then you need to behave with respect. So it's like respect becomes a core value or principle, and how you demonstrate respect. For most Indigenous people, that's like the most important thing, is that you be respectful towards others, not just other people, but everything, the whole planet and the environment and everything. But yes, I don't know. I think it's just like a common thing for a lot of Indigenous people. Actually, I think it's a common thing for a lot of non-Indigenous people too. It is just kind of not sort of the mainstream Western science way of looking at things, which kind of defines everything as an object and objectifies things rather than as the subject that we're interacting with.
But I'm also speaking there to the fact that the world has changed quite fundamentally, in that international relations are now characterized by two things that are really very little to do with nation states. One is ecology and one is technology. And you could even add a third, which is financial capital. Capital, ecology, and technology by themselves have been untethered from the nation state, right? And these are the things shaping the world. And if that's the case, relational accountability is something to do with understanding how is capital operating, how is technology operating, what does ecological sanity look like? And if you start asking those questions, free of the burden of your Monday morning imperatives, you might begin to come up with something about how we can begin to organize our collective lives and our forms of governance so that it's not a crazy revolution, but it is a transformative innovation worthy of the new challenges we face.
We get trapped in the smallness of our lives. And when that happens, our understanding of the fullness of the world that we live in collapses. And so there's nothing in front of me except what I'm battling for in a particular way. And one of the things we have before us as humans is, how do we build communities that can participate in the continuing evolutionary game of life? Because we can't do it individually. That's not the way this particular planet and its life is structured.
The most important thing about that is the protocols of coming into relation. So the idea of like Indigenous embassy, which is very much tied up with border work and a different conceptualization of borders. So, what are your borders for? Are they to keep things out? Are they a barrier? Are they something that you wish to expand? So are they a site of aggression or defense, or what is your border, and what is the work that you do at that border? Not just of your nation, but, the borders of identity, of family, of gender, marriage, different institutions like this. How do you do your boundary policing around these things? Or are these things relational boundaries? So in the Indigenous way, a boundary is a site of increase, is a site of relation, a site of access. It's a meeting place. A border is somewhere where you facilitate the movement of people through your spaces and facilitate their inclusion, their access, in good relation, with good protocols and, norms of behavior.
The boundaries are the boundary between structure and that is not yet structured. It is the place where information is organizing itself thermodynamically. It's the place in which seeking and adapting and responding occurs in living systems, which means it's the place where intelligence occurs, right? Intelligence occurs in the adaptive responses to information in our environments through some kind of structures that we have. So you think like the brain stem and our bicameral brain, or whatever part of structure you want to look at, the structures enable that. So taking that way of thinking, how do boundaries play into this? Well, one very important boundary is the edge between two ecosystems. And so what you start to see is that one of the things that happens in living systems is the boundary is where something surprising occurs. The boundary is the place where the system's maintenance of itself is not really the issue. What's happening is the system's ability to maintain itself while interacting with something different from itself. That's where the boundary is, and that's where creativity and innovation must occur.
We assist each other with creating these anti-fragile sort of networks, that just support and maintain each other's sovereignties. So the border isn't a protective thing. So it's the reason when you look at a map of Australia, a map of the Aboriginal tribes of Australia, when you look, you'll see like 500 different little, things. There aren't any big, very big ones that are like enveloping others. So, one of the oldest, longest living cultures on the planet, at the point of invasion a couple of hundred years ago, this was, like New Guinea, like so many different languages and cultures. Now, how is it that, one of these cultures didn't decide to start concentrating their efforts towards building up a military and taking over the other ones and, making one big language, as happened, in the global north? How come that didn't happen? Well, it's simply because of these relations. So I guess it's those anti-fragile networks of diplomacy, where people are truly in relation. So it's not like sending someone to the Russian embassy, which, in that other country, it's Russian soil. What's there? So you know what I mean? and there's secrecy and diplomatic pouches, and and that person's the diplomat, and then they go home. It's like, no. Your most important people in your culture will be married to people from here. They will, their children will be raised by us here. Our children will be raised by you over there. You have this accountability because of real relationships that are occurring.
The Great Lakes in North America, the largest aggregated concentration of fresh water on Earth. There are 5 lakes, but it's one basin, and the lakes drain into each other. There's this massive system, right? A drainage and aggregation of water, and it runs out into the North Atlantic or the Arctic Ocean, kind of in that boundary place. So the question is, where's the boundary of the Great Lakes? Because it's not the US-Canadian border. It's not the border between the state of Michigan and the state of Illinois. It's not the border between Michigan and Ohio. Those are human fictions, right? Those are human fictions. The thing that defines the Great Lakes is a thing called the Niagara Escarpment, which is a 3,000-mile-long ridgeline of rock, a ripple in the Earth's crust that arcs around from Ontario over to Illinois. And it creates the container that all the water falls into for the Great Basin of the Great Lakes. And so the question of boundary is a dynamic evolutionary boundary, right? It's like that eventually the Niagara Falls is eroding at something like 2 feet per year, the amount of water it's cutting away. So in about another 20,000 years, Niagara Falls will arrive at Lake Erie, and then Lake Erie will drop by 200 feet and be the same level as Lake Ontario. And so the boundaries are these places where interactions occur. And this really matters because you can have these tipping points in them. Like when Niagara Falls gets back to Lake Erie, it's going to transform the whole Great Lakes system. Or it's basically going to reduce the volume of water by something like 20% across the whole system. So we care about borders and boundaries because they're the place where creative and adaptive responses are needed, and it's the place where the surprising tipping points are going to be found. And so not all of them, but the ones that are system defining, that define what kind of system it is. So when we talk about how do we manage the complexity of the real world, then what we really care about is what is happening at those boundaries. What can we learn from those boundaries? How do we maintain continual inquiry and always be asking questions about what's happening at those boundaries so that we can understand the behavior of the systems themselves? Otherwise, we're going to be system blind in such a profound way. It's like the idea that you put a wall between the US and Mexico as if that's a real boundary. That's not a real boundary. The Colorado River goes right across it, or what's left of it. So on. And so the question of boundaries becomes a question of interaction, creativity, and innovation, and surprising tipping point behaviors.
And it might be that the kind of foreign policy initiative we need cannot be seen through the prism of the nation state.
If you look at North America, there's several hundred different First Nations groups, each develop their own protocols and for how to behave in their own particular areas. Some groups develop also protocols for how this is how we behave in relation to our neighbors, because our land sort of sets up protocols for behaving in a good way with our neighbors. So when you have the say like confederations or confederacies that were built that sort of guided a lot of, say, the U.S. Constitution, those were based on international relations, right? But it's also there was that recognition. It's kind of like a Commonwealth kind of idea where that, yes, each individual group maintains their own autonomy and their self-determination, but make some rules for how we're going to work together. But it doesn't mean I automatically impose my rules on someone else. So I think that probably traditionally there was a lot more understanding of what needs to happen on neighboring territories. And and how to go about traveling into neighboring territories and following their protocols, or not following them specifically, but it's like, all right, as a Cree person on this territory, this is how I should behave. Because I'm not Sealift, right? So I don't have to follow all the exact protocols of the Sealift person, but I have to follow protocols of being a good visitor on their territory. Yeah, so like that's sort of how things developed here in North America, and I think probably most places that develop that way. It's only as I think as nation states get bigger and bigger, they kind of try to make these universal rules that kind of maybe don't match the local landscape anymore, or become universalized, and then kind of lose their adaptability or their flexibility, maybe.
And whether it's a community of nations or a community of communities, of cities, or of individuals, this applies across the board. And the first level of that, and these are all sort of levels that build up, is it's a worldview that's called the other, or othering is a term I use sometimes, where we align ourselves because the other is something we don't want in the world, we disagree with violently, we see the harm and danger. And so what holds us together is the fight against the other. But what that, we all see where that goes, and the kind of community that creates, which gets smaller and smaller and more and more inward turning. So the next level up, she suggests, is where the identity, and these are all sort of identity groups that we form to be able to as the basis for building community, for then being able to work on whatever we want to work on together. The next one up is around, it's like our shared identity, what we hold in common and care about. And so we come together around that. And so we're actually at this point not just trying to eliminate, but we're trying to create something. And frequently what that turns into is a movement. We try to start a movement to bring that out into the world. The problem, of course, is then it starts a movement, counter movement, for those who hold different set of values. And so that's, again, if we're going to create community where we can continue the alignment in a growthful way. The third one she called the greater whole worldview, and I'm simplifying this tremendously, but the notion is it's the recognition of what we share in common and are dependent on. And that's what I was just talking about, which is when we can see ourselves as life is structured in nested wholes, and begin to say, what is it that we gain from a healthy, larger system, and what is it we have to contribute, and how does that create meaning for each of us through that contribution, and how does our collaboration be enriched by enabling each other to make that more meaningful contribution? Suddenly you've got a different game being played. And since that's the way life is actually constructed, and has constructed itself, the biosphere has created that form of life. We're dealing with what's real in that case, instead of what we've artificially imagined out of some machine world fantasy that we carried for a few hundred years.
Is the nation state the best form of governance 30 years from now? And if not, what does it mean for what we do today? What kind of new international institutions do we need if our existing ones are not working? What does polycentric governance look like? Is there such a thing as global civil society that might be mobilized? If you're working in a foreign ministry in let's say, a more or less democratic country, and you're operating with the logic of a nation state, you're thinking like a state. I forget who first used that language of thinking like a state, but somebody did. There may already be a problem, because your bureaucratic logic of representing a state's interests presumes that the form of the nation state is somehow a legitimate one in the context of relational accountability. It assumes that somehow that filter and that touchstone is a legitimate way to make sense of what should happen next. Now, if you're a diplomat, you're like, okay, well, that's interesting philosophically, but what do I do on Monday morning, right?
The sovereignty of your, like, I don't want to say nation, because that's a really new term. It's only just over a century old, the idea and the system of nations that we have now. But the sovereignty of your group, you know, in your land base, in your territory, that's sacrosanct. It's not something that can be changed, because, like I said before, the land is a permanent ledger and the stories are in the land. So if I took your land, I wouldn't know what to do with it, you know, except wreck it, because I don't know the story. You know, I would have to actually come into relation with your land in order to live there. I would have to learn the stories and the language and the culture, and I would have to marry in there, or I would have to be adopted by like your father or your grandfather or something, and I'd have to come into the land like that, you know. So yeah, that it's a whole different idea of sovereignty. So we also travel, all of us, to meet in sacred places periodically for very big ceremonies with multi-tribal gatherings, and these are really important. A lot of ceremony in the borderlands and elsewhere is increase ceremony. So increase ceremony is where, you know, you're making signals, you know, with your voices, the music you're making, the movement, the dance, everything else. You know, these are signals that are going into an informatic system in the landscape, the same way our flower will set off a whole series of signals, you know, in an ecosystem, you know, or, you know, flying ants, or, you know, different scents, smells, winds, weather, things in an ecosystem will, you know, set off a series of signals through the informatics of that of those signals. And so our ceremonies are like that. You know, they actually give signals, you know, out there, and they actually foster, you know, increase in our natural systems. Increase is about, it's not increasing the population of animals or the number of plants or the size of the fruit or the size of a harvest. That's growth. So we don't do growth, we do increase. So what is increased is the complexity and quality of relationships. So our ceremonies of increase are about fostering more and better relationships, you know, between people and animals, and between people and plants and animals, you know, everything. So it's all about maximizing the infinite possibilities of how many relationships and pairings that you can have and groups that you can have, you know, within a system. You're maximizing that all the time and complexifying that, but also increasing quality and complexity in the relational space in between people.
So if we go back and say, why are nation states failing? It's because they're not drawn around boundaries of what the earth knows is real. Like, they're not drawn around the boundaries of ocean mixing, evaporation, and rainfall. They're not defined around migration of whales, you know, or pick any other earth system process. They were defined by human agendas, right, and human political identities. And so what we start to see is that the bioregional approach is where we're going no matter what, if humans are going to stick around, because it's really just coming back into relationship with the earth. And I mean, in the most practical, real world sense, we know how to live because we know how the earth makes life possible. And so what nation states are needing to do now is they're needing to create collaboration. And by the way, they're already doing this, whether they realize it or not. They create collaboration around data. Like, you might have a collaboration in the North Sea, And the North Sea is a collaboration between Greenland and Norway and Sweden and Finland and, etc. Right? They have a collaboration around a physical existing thing, which is the North Sea. But that's a bioregional lens. It's treating the North Sea as real and then creating data sharing and governing around the North Sea. So you see that by necessity, nation states will increasingly organize their data and their policies bioregionally, or they will mismanage things so badly that their nation state will go away. Right? And whoever's managing it better will come in and take its place.
One of the strategies that's core to our work is something we call planetary acupuncture. And it's not unlike, you wouldn't be wrong in sort of seeing an analogy in actual acupuncture as a practice. And acupuncture is powerful because through a particular energetic insertion at a core point, energy moves through a system. And so what we call system boundaries, I think is what you're talking about as borders. So those are points at which, if you're thinking about, it all relies on what I was talking about before. It's about being able to see nested systems, not just a line, but actually this is the point at which energy flows back and forth in ways that can affect both systems, and does all the time, but we oftentimes don't even see it. But when we can see and be conscious about it as nurturing the growth of the whole of the system, we know that we work from place. We always are bringing people back to the place that they live in and understanding its uniqueness and their uniqueness in relationship to it, because this is something we can hold and we can share together. But if we hold place as a closed off, bounded, closed system, then it ultimately just shrivels and dies. So this is where it's the exchange and seeing these across systems and across larger systems that allows us to have an acupuncture point in a place at the boundary that can move through the system, both across and up levels on it. So that's a fairly abstract way of talking about it, but it's, if we start to look at just even how our bodies work, and bring that out into the world, then it says these boundaries, for the most part, around nation states are totally artificial and irrational in some cases. They're historical artifacts that didn't come from life, but rather from battles back and forth. So, but they still can, they've created life on either side of them. So, of course, that gives us an opportunity to have exchange information, move energies back and forth in ways that you can't when you're completely isolated from the other systems.
Somehow, slowly but surely, we have to move from a fixation with the nation state. I'm not saying the nation state disappears, we still need it for a while, but I think the nation state has to be allowed a slow and dignified death. I think the future is not the nation state. I think it's something more like the bioregion. And I think we need to find ways of moving towards bioregional governance. Now, I don't quite know how this plays out, because it plays out over a decade scale, which is a bit beyond most of our horizon and vision. But I think it means that we start organizing collective life around mountains and rivers and oceans and other forms of bioregion, where people identify with the land in quite a particular way that's not just about, oh, I'm Scottish or I'm British or I'm Dutch or whatever, but rather I belong to this part of the world. And yes, I travel, and yes, I have an international perspective, and yes, I have my Cosmo local partners, and I'm learning about schooling in Bhutan or whatever. But this patch of land, this area, this is my responsibility. my relational accountability starts here.
A bioregion can be defined in many ways, of course, but essentially it is a unit of territory, a fairly large landscape in which you've got systems, you've got ecosystems and human systems, and there's a coherence that runs through all layers of this place, so which gives it a very particular identity that people can describe and relate to. So this kind of sense of identity can be layered all the way up from geology and deep time up through kind of the fauna, the flora, the economic history, the political history, the social history, the land use patterns, the rainfall, et cetera, et cetera. So when you're thinking about your bioregion, we've used something that Regenesis, the regenerative design practitioners, use in thinking about what they call story of place. And story of place is a way to really kind of deepen into an understanding of who a place is and how a place functions.
A bioregion is a whole life context. It's the life context of a holistic life system, which means it has a geophysical basis in reality in tectonic plates, types of soils, hydrological systems, movements of water. And then from that, the web of relationships of ecology that are possible and that can flourish in that place. So there's a type of tree for the type of climate and so on. There's this way in which the ecology emerges from and is consistent with the geophysical reality of the place. And then as you bring humans into a bioregional understanding, then you start to see cultural identity, the imagined understanding of where is here and how does it relate to what I perceive to be there, that this internal semantic space of relating to place comes from an understanding of how I am part of this place and how I relate to it. So being bioregional entails that directly. Now, how this relates to governance and to relational accountability is that first and foremost, any kind of governing you're going to do needs to be based in a direct relationship to what brings life to your place. So it's things like, do you know where your water comes from? As Peter Berg, one of the original bioregional thinkers, he would ask, do you know where your water comes from? And most people don't. But if they do, then you say, well, have you ever been to the source of your water? And most people haven't. So then the natural question is, well, why don't you go there? And if you go to the source of your water, you enter into a different way of relating to the water that you use. It's not just coming from the tap that you turn the valve and the water comes out of a pipe. It's that it emerges from, like, if it's the Pacific Ocean dropping snow onto the Rocky Mountains, which creates the snowpack, you start to see my water comes from the headwaters of the Colorado River, which comes from a hydrological cycle connected to the Pacific Ocean. That you're basically discerning a place as part of a living planet and a real life context.
So it's your place. It's your place that shapes your culture, your tongue, everything else, your protocols, your laws. So, when different people meet, they're meeting, they're not just bringing people together, they're bringing different places together, and the stories of your place, these are grounded in your place. A story that has no place, it's not really a story. It's a story, but it's not law, because a story should also be a map. If you can't see a map when you hear a story, then, and that map isn't real, like the story doesn't have to be real. The events of the story don't have to be real, but the map should be real, Yeah, because if that is so, then it's connected. The land is a document. It's a permanent ledger, if you like. If you want to put it in blockchain terms, the land is a permanent ledger, and the stories that are in the land, they're there for good. And if you can make story over deep time, involving multiple generations, if you can do it slowly and put together a story with tried and true, tested bits of information and protocols and handy tips for what to do and what not to do. If these are in your story and the story has a map, then that is law then.
Again, there can be no universal rules. So I think tending to your relationships is important. I think most all diplomats understand that. It's like everything is built on a network of relationships. So we have networks of relationships with other people, but also extend that understanding to, we also have a network of relationships with the land that we're on, a network of relationships with all of the materials that are around us. I think really important to start to recognize patterns in how things work. So it's like, you can see patterns in human relationships, right? It's like, well, you build up a network of, well, I trust this person. So, and if I act in a trustworthy way, they're going to trust me in return. And then I can you build up a set of how you're going to behave with them. And you recognize that if you betray their trust, it's going to have consequences and implications, right? So if you think about it, the land is also doing the same thing with us. So it's like, if you're being a trustworthy person and behaving towards the land in a certain way, it's going to treat you back in return the same way. But if you're setting up a pattern of being not trustworthy or doing the wrong thing as recorded according to the land, it's going to set up a pattern of, well, it's not going to trust you when you go out and do things on the land. So yeah, we just have to think about that. It's not just interhuman relationships, it's relationships with everything around us.
One of the major international institutions of the last 70 odd years is what began as the UN Declaration of Human Rights and has become a series of different kinds of legal instruments to carry rights and spread them across different aspects of life. So not just political and civil rights, but social and cultural rights. I believe the rights endeavor, while necessary and understandable, has essentially failed. And that while the spirit of it needs to endure, the emancipatory, protective spirit of recognizing the dignity of every human being is absolutely still correct. It's morally correct. It's functionally even something that we can work with. But at an institutional level, it's failed. And the reason it's failed is the premise it's based upon is about protecting, in effect, good citizens from bad governments. It's all about naming and shaming bad governments, and it's all about legal recourse for citizens against their states. I think this is problematic for the reasons I mentioned earlier, which is that the world is now shaped primarily by technology, ecology, and capital. And those things do not intersect well with a rights framework that's about citizen and national government. It's obtuse, basically. And I wrote about this in something that you can find online called An Open Letter to the Human Rights Movement. I think instead, we need something like a declaration of human responsibilities or duties. And we need to sort of begin to turn it around so that people are less about my rights towards my own government, although that still somehow has to be baked into the culture, and that's where it's complex. Because there is a lot of abuse and oppression out there that needs to be guarded against. And many of the human rights defenders are some of the most heroic and brilliant people in the world. So it's not knocking that. It's just saying that at an institutional global sense, it's not working. And we need a reframing, a new meta-political moment. Just like there was a UN Declaration of Human Rights, we need something like a UN Declaration of Human Duties to go alongside it. For what it's worth, back in the day, Mahatma Gandhi wouldn't sign the declaration because he felt that without a commensurate Declaration of Human Duties and responsibilities, it didn't make sense. And I think there's something in that. I think we need a moment where together diplomats can come together and say, okay, beyond rights, what is the moral clarion call in a time of ecological collapse and technological imperialism that we can all get behind, whether you're China or Russia, UK, Israel, India, doesn't matter. Where is our common humanity in this time of what feels like breakdown?
So people often ask us, how do you get started? How do you kind of animate your bioregion? How do you get it off the ground? So one of our first questions is, how big is here? How big is your bioregion? How do you feel when you're going over the edge of your bioregion into the next bioregion? And how would you tell the story of your place in terms not just of what it's been through the centuries, but its potential for the future? and how it can, yeah, be a kind of beacon for change in the future.
But in our way, we embrace that. You know, we embrace all of the cultural expressions. We embrace it fully, you know, because that's what adds complexity. That's what creates diversity. It doesn't create vast monocultures. If you quarantine yourself away, that creates a monoculture, and that decreases diversity.
And it starts obviously with consciousness, because awareness is what's out there. It could be or awareness of the stuff that's going on inside me. Consciousness is where I actually begin to see the dynamic interrelationships and the consequences as a result of those.
Relational accountability for me is very palpable as a father and a husband in a community that has a school with other parents and families, because you just quite quickly realize that the nuclear family is quite a fragile unit. The idea that we're expected to bring up our children ourselves is not one of the better ideas of modernity. You need each other, you know, and accountability there means when I'm looking after other people's children, I look after them as if they were my own, and I expect them to do the same.
If we really are part of the earth, then what is our responsibility? If biology was true and humans really are genetically related to all the rest of life on Earth, if that was true, how would we manage things differently? I have a feeling a lot of people are very uncomfortable with what's going on in the world, may not know what they should be doing differently, but they know that whatever we're doing is not what we should be doing. And we have to get back to basics. Like, is that air you're breathing actually coming from plants? Or are we just pretending plants don't matter and that's why we cut down all the forests? Because we're not part of this world. It's like, you know, the idiocy of ignoring biological reality is twofold. One, it'll lead to our own destruction, but the other one is we lose the ability to belong. You know, it's like, where do we belong if it's some imagined somewhere else? Instead of that our mother was always the earth, you know, like that it's not just a playful phrase, it's literally true. It is the system in which life was given to us.
It's not something that you close. It's something, sorry, here's an opening. Take it from here and just keep working on yourself, and I'll keep working on myself, and we just all kind of try to be being better humans. Humanity is a process of becoming, not end product. It's a process.